Welcome to the final episode of the second season of the How to Japanese podcast. Today, I'll be talking about the importance of finding and celebrating your language study successes. And in Japanese, I think about what effect being introverted or extroverted has on language study. Be sure to stick around until the end of the episode for a brief update on one of the topics I addressed in season 1 of the podcast. The last 2 years have been rough. Definite ups and downs, as I think I mentioned in the Japanese section of episode 2 of the podcast. I spent most of 2020 isolated on my own, and after a few months earlier this year when it felt like life had opened up again in Chicago, it's starting to feel like maybe we need to be more cautious. But the world isn't endlessly bleak. I'll have days when I'm feeling down, and then I'll be rummaging around in my kitchen and come across a bag of dry soybeans or the stainless steel pans I used in my Instant Pot, which always remind me that during the pandemic, I learned how to make Nattō, and then I don't feel so down. Nattō is always packed so tightly and carefully in Japan that it seems like it just kind of comes into existence as the units you see in the grocery store. Obviously, that's not the case. Someone somewhere is steaming the soybeans, inoculating them with bacteria, and then effectively letting them rot before packaging them up and shipping them to stores. When I saw Hiroko Tabuchi of the New York Times tweet about attempting to make Nattō in April 2020, at the height of the sourdough boom, I had this gut-level instinct that I could make Nattō, at least without too much trouble if I could track down the right ingredients. I've been brewing beer for over 20 years. I made yogurt when I was living in Japan and here in the US. I've had a couple aborted attempts at kimchi and sauerkraut, so I knew a little bit about the ins and outs of fermentation, and I felt like I'd be able to figure out the details with enough online reading. The most important thing was to find Nattō itself, or some other source for the bacteria to ferment the soybeans. The beans themselves I was confident I could find in Chicago. So I felt fortunate to locate a vial of Nattō Moto on Amazon. They sold out not too long after that, but as I'm recording, you can find a vial for $13.99 with free one-day delivery if you have Amazon Prime. Once I had the spores, it was as simple as learning how to cook the soybeans, inoculating them in a sanitized environment, and letting them stew at around 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 hours. The result is that I've been regularly cooking up 100-gram batches of Nattō over the past year. I know many Americans think hot miso soup for breakfast is strange, but I honestly can't think of anything healthier and more restorative other than a bowl of pho, which is a very underrated breakfast food. I think we all build up experiences like this over time, whether it's with cooking, with our profession, or with hobbies. If you do something long enough, it becomes second nature, and that's what the goal is with language study. So I challenge you, even if you're still struggling with the language and feeling down, to see if you can locate anything that feels completely natural, like you don't even know how you learned it. And if you experience something like that, be sure to write it down and remember it. Moments like that are an awesome way to counteract the other times when you don't feel so great, mistakes you may make, or times when you feel like nothing is working. Over the course of this season of the podcast, I had a couple instances like that in the Japanese sections. In episode 10, I used the phrase keiken zero to describe my experience drinking to the age of 20. I said, keiken zero de wa arimasen deshita. I don't ever remember learning that construction in class, and when I wrote it, I kind of doubted myself for a second, so I did some searches on Twitter and Google and found a lot of different examples of keiken zero. In episode 12, I used the word tein-san to refer to a restaurant worker. Here too, I kind of second-guessed myself after writing it and managed to convince myself it was okay after turning up a few Google hits. Often with successes like these, you don't even realize that you're doing them, so they just pass by. The mistakes, on the other hand, are painful, so it's no surprise that they remain so vivid in our memories. There are 3 steps to alleviating this issue. First, put in the time to your language study. Set up something consistent and somewhat substantial, no matter what it is. For example, more than 1 kanji a day and less than 100 kanji a day. What is substantial will vary based on where you are in your studies, but consistency is the same across the board. Aim for 5 to 6 times a week, whatever it is you're doing. Second, trust that it's working out. Trust that you'll retain what you need to retain if you're putting in the time, that the patterns you're using are correct, and that if they're not, you'll eventually realize or someone will tell you, and that given enough time and repetitions, you'll get to where you want to be. Trust is what helped me realize I could make Nattō. Third, it helps if you know where you want to be. Setting some kind of goal is critical, and having some reason to use the language can help you set those goals, whether it's to read a particular book, watch a certain show, or do a certain activity in Japan. I often think that it would be nice to know a programming language, something beyond just HTML and very basic CSS. And the coders that I've spoken to always tell me that it's just like learning a language. This makes sense to me logically, but programming languages still felt so difficult until I realized something incredibly important. I don't even know why I would want to learn how to code. Beyond my personal websites, I don't have any big projects I'm working on. If I did, I might be more motivated to figure something out. I do think that setting that goal, having some kind of project in mind, is critical with language study. That project can be simple as ordering in Japanese at a restaurant or making a friend in Japan. There has to be something though, even if it's just moving to Japan to live. Otherwise, you'll be a coder with no project to work on. Once you set that goal, be sure to catalog all the small victories you're making along the way. It's often a long path to success, and it helps to win all the small battles that you can.
私は基本的に内向的な人です。具体的に言わせれば 60% 内向的で 40% 外向的なんです。一人で時間を過ごすのは構いませんが、限りがあります。定期的に人と話したり、友達と遊んだりしないと気分が悪くなります。言語学習の立場からすると、完全に内向型人間は言語を話せるようになることは大変です。相手がいないとなかなか練習できません。バーチャル的にでもある程度外出ないと言語が話せないです。なので私のように内向型人間は頑張って外に出ないといけません。10年前も私はそんな気がしました。大学院に入学するために日本からアメリカに戻ったんですが、授業は東アジア研究などと全く関係がなくて、もし言語学習を続けたかったとしたら、自分で言語を使える機会を探さないといけなかったことが分かりました。その頃、Facebook は日本でまだ普及していなくて、Zoom もまだ発明されていませんでした。出身のニューオーリンズには日本語が話せる人が非常に少ないので、当時人気があったミクシーという SNS 以外は、新しい日本人の友達を見つける方法はありませんでした。それでミクシーのグループを調べて、ニューオーリンズと関係あるいくつかのグループに紹介文を載せておきました。まず最初にアメフトのグループに投稿しました。次はジャズ、そしてニューオーリンズに興味がある方のためのグループ。そして待ちました。日本から戻ったのは5月頃で、大学院が始まったのは8月だったので、夏の間アメリカの生活に慣れて、ゆっくり小説を書こうとしていましたが、ほとんどが失敗作でした。ワールドカップの試合を見たり、地ビルイベントに行ったりして、友達と遊びながら、内向性と外向性を調整していました。その中、急にミクシーでメッセージがいくつか届きました。一つは、セインツという地元のアメフトチームに興味があってニューオーリンズに来る予定だった大学卒業生からでした。翔平という人でした。翔平さんのいとこさんは航空会社の客室乗務員だったので、簡単に全国を回ることができたようです。頑張って数日間ニューオーリンズを案内しました。午前5時にアメフトのトレーニングも見に行ってきました。楽しかったです。今でも2人と Facebook でつながっています。次、小林さんという人からメッセージが来ました。フランス人の夫さんと一緒にニューオーリンズに引っ越して、夫さんの方はフランスの総領事館で働く予定でした。月1回程度でコーヒーを飲んで日本語で会話しました。この2つのメッセージ以外はニューオーリンズにいた3年間はほとんど日本語を話しませんでした。大学院で忙しくなって暇な時間があれば自分で読むのが良かったです。今から振り返ってみるともう少し頑張って日本人とつなげればよかったなと思います。ミクシーは今 使われているかどうかはわかりませんが、Facebook が普及してきたので、Mixi やら Facebook やらどこかオンラインでもう少し会話相手を見つけるはずでした。しかし、諦めなくてよかったです。主に一人で読んだり翻訳したり時間を過ごしてなんとか話す能力を全部失わないように大学院の間を生き残りました。シカゴに引っ越してから日本と関係ある仕事をしていたので残念ながら少しは油断したと思います。もちろんジャパンタイムズの記事を書き始めてたまに翻訳の仕事もありましたが転職するまでは毎日日本語を使っていませんでした。転職して毎日日本語を使うようになっても十分じゃないなと去年の秋頃気づいたんです。そこで NHK ラジオニュースを積極的に聞くことにしました。もちろんそれは内向型でも簡単にできる勉強方法なんです。でも積極的に続けるのは若干辛いです。現在の快適度に影響があります。言いたいのはこれです。外国語を勉強するとき、何らかの形でバランスが崩すでしょう。内向型人間は外に出て人と話す必要があります。外向型人間は家で時間を過ごして漢字を何回も書く必要があります。両方とも現在の生活パターンが変わって、その変わりはいつも決していいことではないと思います。少しでもその違和感を我慢しないといけません。しかし、その違和感を事前に予想すると、つまり自分の期待を管理すると、もっとうまく反応して調整できるのではないでしょうか。リスナーの皆さんもぜひこのバランスを考えながら、言語の勉強を続けてみてください。
And that's it. We're done with season 2 of the podcast. If you've made it through any of the episodes this season, thanks so much for listening. I wanted to end on a little update from last season. In season 1, episode 4, I started off with an amoide banashi about a bar owner I met in Tokushima back in 2003. I resolved to send him a letter thanking him for his hospitality. I finally got around to doing that in the summer of 2019, and I included a Dr. John CD with my note. A few months later, I was surprised to receive a letter from one of Abe-san's friends who speaks a little English and runs a New Orleans-themed cafe in the city. The letter included 2 photos of Abe-san and a friend listening to the CD. It was such a nice thing to receive, and I've put off a reply far too long. I did manage to track down the cafe owner on Facebook so I could thank her for the message and ask her to pass on my gratitude to Abe-san. But the letter really deserves an equivalent response, so I'm hoping to print out a few photos and send those when I get a moment. This is a lesson to be me, do the work to maintain the connections that you've made, but also not to be me, do it more regularly. This is part of the fun of doing Japanese. Nothing comes for free, but your efforts are generally rewarded. The more you put in, the more you'll get out. And thanks again for listening. You can find How to Japanese on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Substack. それではまた次のシーズン. See you all in season 3.